Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a simple game by the name of Bingolino. This is put out in Germany by Schmidtspiel in an international edition. It does have English rules in the box. It's designed by Elizabeth and Gunter Burkhardt, and it's a game, the box says ages 8 and up. I think smaller children would be able to play it. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to play it for 2 to 4 players. I'm going to take a few minutes to explain the game's simple rules, then come back and give you some thoughts about the game. I've laid out here the components that you get with Bingolino. You get 66 of these tiles. They have numbers on them ranging, I think, to 22, from 1 to 22. There's duplicates within those numbers. I think there's 3 of each. I'm not certain of that. And then you also get some of these scoring markers, as well as 5 standard 6-sided dice. So each player is going to draw from this pile at random 16 of these tiles, and then they're going to arrange them in a 4x4 grid in front of them. They could put any number in any space. So this player might choose to put this 20 here and this 15 here. And the objective of this game is to complete rows of these tiles that are flipped over. So you're going to be able to flip these tiles over, and as soon as you complete a row or column or diagonal of flipped over tiles, you'll get to put one of those scoring markers next to it. The first person to get 4 of those scoring markers is going to be the player who wins the game. So here this player would have 2 points. Again, the objective is to get 4 points. The way that you're going to flip these over is by rolling the dice. So players are going to be taking turns as the active player in this game, and when you are the active player, you're going to be able to choose how many of these 5 dice you want to roll. So maybe this player would roll all 5. They could choose to roll fewer if they wanted to. So let's say they roll all 5. And what they'll do is they'll announce their total of the dice that they've rolled to the entire table. So we have 17 here. So now any player who has a 17 in front of them can choose to flip over 117. This player could also do that if they'd like. If they don't want to do that, or can't do that, they as the active player have the sole option to remove any die that they rolled from the dice pool. So now we have a total of 16 and flip over one thing with that value. So it's either or for the active player. The inactive players have to take the result of all of the dice. The active player has an option. If the active player could not roll something, so let's say, or flip something, let's say they rolled this and they didn't have the option to just remove a die to flip something else, they have to then turn over one of the things that they've previously flipped, and that could be any tile that has been previously turned over. Inactive players, if they can't, if in this case, flip over a 17, they do not have to flip over one of their previously flipped over tiles. So only the active player has an obligation to flip over a tile on their turn, but they do have the dice mitigation option. So really that's it. The game is that simple. Essentially you're going to keep going, with players going until one player has achieved 4 columns or rows or diagonals all flipped over, and that is how you play Bingolino. Okay, so that is Bingolino, and I think on a certain level there's not a lot to say about this game. It's a very simple game. The bingo in its title is very indicative of the level of complexity, I think. There are certainly decisions to be made. When you see your initial tiles, how you set up your grid is going to be important, and then the number of dice that you're going to be choosing to roll is going to be important, especially if you're looking at what other players have in front of them. But at its core, this is really a simple, very casual game that I think works relatively well for 10 to 15 minutes. I will say that I enjoy this game in a variant that I've taken to playing with it, where instead of using a 4x4 grid, you create a 5x5 grid. That works with the components that you get in the game with 2 players. I actually bought a second copy. This is a relatively inexpensive game, so I just bought a second one. They would both fit in the main box. I just haven't disposed of one of these boxes yet. Because this is a 10 euro game, so for 20 euros I just bought a second 2 copies, and now I can play with 4 players in a 5x5 grid. To me, that makes the game a little bit more interesting for sure. It lasts slightly longer. You still just would play to 4 points, but because you're creating a 5x5 grid, and not to get too into the geometry here, you create sections that are along the diagonals that have more more possible rows that they could complete, and then you have dead spaces where they could only be in a vertical and a horizontal row. So there's a tiny bit more strategy in this about where you're going to get your numbers, and try to arrange them so that you could have a preponderance of high or low numbers. And I just find it to be a little bit more satisfying with a 5x5 grid. So I would recommend playing it either as a 2-player game or playing it with a second set of the tiles, and playing it as a up to 4-player game with the 5x5 grid. I will say that when doing that, you probably still want to keep your 2 piles of tiles separate, just so you have the same distribution of tiles for the players, roughly. So not to get too far from the subject at hand, though, this is, like I said, a very simple game. It's one that I find to be reasonably compelling for what it is. It's pretty mindless, but it's enjoyable, and it's fun, and it's one that I could play with people who are just not gamers at all, and people enjoy the very light decisions that it has in it. I wouldn't sing its praises. I wouldn't overpraise it, but I think that's a very approachable game. It's one that I haven't seen anybody really talking about, but it's one that I've actually, I think to a surprising degree, have enjoyed my plays of it. So I would recommend you check out Bingolino. Another nice light game from Schmidt-Spiel. And those are my thoughts on it. Thanks for watching.